Hello and welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to do a real-time step-by-step oil pastel tutorial. This is a great beginner-friendly process because I'm still relatively new with oil pastels. Thankfully, having been in the fine arts for so long, having worked with oil paints, I already have a lot of tools in my arsenal, but they're not advanced because I'm just not there yet. So I'm excited to walk you through this entire process. One quick note before we dive in, the audio for the first half, it was kind of wonky. And so I'm just going to do a voiceover for it and still give you kind of the tips and the tools, but some of the hand motions might not match and some of it might be a little bit more clunky than what you're used to, because usually when I'm doing it in real time, I'm just telling you what I'm thinking. And unfortunately, even I can't read my own brain in post. So I'm going to do the best that I can and we're just going to stick with it. I still think that you'll find this super valuable and I'm excited to dive in. All right, let's get started. For this oil pastel painting, we are going to be working on the Strathmore 400 series pastel paper in just this creamy off-white, and then I'm going to be using these higher quality oil pastels. This has been my first experience with this higher quality. It's much more buttery, and I would say it lends itself more to feeling like painting. Now, some of these are a little bit harder than others, so I found that the ultramarine blue, which is not the one I'm holding here, but it is a little bit harder, where the other ones can kind of melt in your hands like butter. And that is a bit of an exaggeration. It's not quite like butter, but you will feel it kind of melting in your hand. And again, I think that helps to give it the more painterly quality. So it's a less like working with crayons and a little bit more like working with oil paints that are just in a stick form, which is exactly what the point of this is. But some people have said that they're a little bit harder to control, this particular brand. I actually really like using these because it is less like crayons. It feels more like painting. I'm more able to get that painterly effect overall. Now, one of the reasons that these are less like your waxy crayons and a little bit more like oil paints is because they are infused with oil throughout, and that oil never fully dries down. So unlike oil painting, that will, it'll take some time, but it will dry down. Oil pastels never fully dry down, at least in my experience. I've always been able to go back and mess around with them. And so the good news is you are able to return and reactivate that. But the oils, as you can see, do seep into the paper. It sticks with the painting, and you do need to protect it. And the last tool that I recommend is I have kept this little foam piece that came with my oil pastels, and I've been using it to clean off. If you don't have something like this, go ahead and grab some paper towel, just so that you're able to clean off your oil pastels so they don't get kind of muddy. Now, similar to any other project that you've done with me, I like to start with a good contour as a base, or just a loose sketch even where I've kind of already solved some problems. But because I don't want any extra graphite, I'm going to lighten it with my kneaded eraser, and I'm just rolling it over the top. This will lighten it softly where I'll still be able to see it. I know that you guys can't see it, which is why I have the overlay on it. But that just helps me where I don't have to solve problems. I don't have to worry about, getting this ellipse right or getting this curve correct or, getting the shape correct, because I've already solved that step of the problem and I can just move on to focusing on color. I'm going to start by filling in just kind of the base colors, and you'll see I'm using yellow ochre quite a bit. It's a nice warm yellow. It's a little bit more desaturated, so that will help me to get the saturation level that I need. Think of it kind of like an underpainting where I'm trying to establish some of those initial values and the initial tone. And because this is a little bit moodier than my very bright limited color palette collection, oil pastel collection is allowing me to be just right off the bat, the yellow ochre went over pretty much all of it, but I deepened it in areas where there's going to be a little bit more of a shadow, or I'm going to need that golden color. Next, we're switching to the color Mandarin, like a mandarin orange. And I'm just going to use this to, again, deepen, kind of applying the next layer. So we've got the yellow ochre all over everything just to help with that warmth and the overall tone and the kind of the vibe I'm trying to capture. And now I'm going to go in with the orange and build up some of that section. I'm going slowly, and I'm going to keep continuing to build on it and add more colors. But anything where I see like there's a little bit of that orangey undertone, I'm going to apply this. And as I was adding the orange, I realized that there's this section on the top left of this first peach that has kind of a cooler undertone. It has more purpley. So I want to pull in that blue, ultramarine blue, because it is a harder stick. So it'd be much more difficult to add it on the top later. So if I add it in before I'm mixing the red in, that should mix and give me kind of that purpley undertone, really help knock everything back. Blending it with the orange should help it to be a little bit more neutral because it's not like a screaming purple, but it worked out well. Now I did this for a couple of different areas, but later on I ended up using more of a burnt umber. So if you have something like that, that might be a good one to pull in. Because the whole composition is rather warm, I actually ended up preferring using the burnt umber, but I did find that mixing in the ultramarine blue at this point did work out well overall. Now at this stage of the game, I've been working really lightly, pressing very lightly, but now I'm starting to try and blend colors in. I have a lot of the undertones placed and I'm just really applying some good pressure here. And instead of just going back and forth with my crayon with the oil pastel, I'm going in more in different directions, sometimes even a little bit more rounded, and that helps to kind of mix everything and blend it together. And I'm just going one shape at a time. I'm seeing, okay, there's this larger red section here, and then it splits off. We have this yellow section in the middle. And we're not trying to swallow the whole thing at once. We're just working one small step at a time. Now, one thing with oil pastels is you really want to work with the medium, really any medium that you're using, but especially something like oil pastels. This is a thick crayon, and especially if you're going to compare it to something like a pencil, which is what I generally work with, which has a much finer tip. You can see I'm going to get significantly less detail in here just due to the nature of the oil pastels, and I really want to work with that. I'm challenging myself to embrace slightly different style, embrace slightly different strengths within my style in order to create a beautiful effect overall. So it will mean, okay, we're doing a little bit less detail, but maybe we can get some beautiful blending in here. We're really working with the color play. Try to, whatever medium you're working with, try to embrace its quirks rather than work against it, and you'll find that you like it a lot more. At least I know I do. All right, here we pulled out that yellow ochre again, and I'm overlapping with the red as I'm working towards the brighter yellow areas before I step in with our brighter lemon yellow color. And I'm just moving in towards that gradient, allowing the colors to overlap and to work together in order to get a nice smooth blend in here. It doesn't mean I'm not going to go over any of the red areas like I just did here, but it does mean that I'm kind of planning ahead and I'm trying to work slowly. The nice thing about having that deeper red layer on there is that having the yellow go over it, even if I'm pushing a little bit harder, it helps to actually blend the two together and we get this nice neutral orangey tone underneath. It's not as bright as the mandarin color that came in my kit, and it reads a little bit more what I'm trying to get with these peaches. But if I clean off that oil pastel and I push a little bit harder, I'm going to get more of that true color. This yellow is very creamy and it transfers color really well. So you can see I pushed a little bit harder and I was able to break through even the red color that was underneath in order to really deposit this pigment. Next, I'm going to add just a little bit of white to the top. If you look at our reference image, you can see that, peaches have that kind of fuzzy, that, I don't know, it's just an interesting quality. I've seen it on the texture of their skins many times in the past, and it is a little bit tricky to capture. So I was trying to kind of smoke out some of this color by tapping it in and then blending it in with my pinky finger and just allowing that color to get a little bit of that highlight without being too strong. It was also on the top, which was really tricky because it's definitely darker over there, but you want to have this highlighted, I don't know. So we just kind of played with it. I wouldn't say that this was like the most successful. I end up knocking it back a little bit more, which you'll see, but I do like overall how it worked. One nice thing about white is that once you are applying it to something, it does desaturate it. We often think about how black desaturates things, but if you think about it, any color that you add is going to desaturate from the pure color that was there already. But white and black are actually kind of infamous for this. And if you think about white, if you're having trouble thinking about how white desaturates, think about pastels. They're not like neons. They're light colors, where a neon color is light and bright. A pastel is light but soft, and that softness comes from adding white to it, and it just kind of knocks down the color a little bit. Okay, back to the tutorial. Sorry, we could talk about color theory all day long. I'm using the burnt umber and I'm placing it at the bottom where that shadow is, and I'm slowly flicking it up with my finger. So in more of a flicking motion where I'm just kind of tapping on our paper rather than scraping or rubbing back and forth. It's a great way to blend, or like here, I'm depositing some soft layers of color to capture that shadow that is right by that stem. And that allows me to transfer the color without necessarily picking up what's underneath or aggravating it or blending it too much. I found that that's a pretty easy, soft way to add almost like a glaze or an extra wash of color where we're just adding a little bit over the top. I don't want, a ton of color mixed in there and added in. And that's what I've been doing. It's been a lot of kind of back and forth with this particular section. I'm going in, I'm adding a little bit more white, and I'm adjusting the shape overall of this peach. So I'm adding a little bit more red in here, and we're going to carefully blend it with our fingers once we get kind of all these colors laid down. So I added red to kind of expand it, but forgot that I had the yellow ochre underneath, so I had to add it on top. Thankfully with oil pastels, you can't even tell once they're all mixed in together. And then we're just blending it all together with our finger. So having those three colors, the yellow ochre, the red, and that white in there is giving me a little bit more of that hazy look that I'm trying to capture with this peach. And now that we have a little bit more of the right-hand side finished, I'm going to start diving into more of these shadows and the left-hand side. So that means we're going to go in with a little bit more of that burnt umber, and we're going to try and capture those shadows. Now, I like using a dirty finger for this. This finger particularly has red on it, and so that's helping it to automatically mix. And I'm able to blend it by continuing to apply a little bit of color on and then use those flicking motions to get everything nice and smooth, to get that gradient nice and smooth. Holy smokes, my fingers are dirty. Sorry about that. Still learning the camera angles for working with oil pastels. It's just a little bit different than I'm used to working. And much like painting, we're just going to continue layering. I'm going to continue adding light layer of the shadow color and adding a little bit more red in there to get the tone, adding a little bit more of the yellow to the lighter areas, and just adjusting slowly as we go. Again, kind of like when we were applying that initial color, we're just trying to tackle one section at a time. And as one changes, we might need to go back and adjust a previous one. Now, one thing as you're blending, if you are going to be blending, make sure that you're working with the shape of the peach overall. So I'm trying to kind of get it curved up towards that center, and anything that is coming around, whether it's on the right-hand side or from the top, I'm going to try and curve it in towards the peach. That will help to shape it naturally and help it to flow and read a little bit better overall. And now we're building up some of that yellow. We lost some of it while we're adding the shadow, and while that's fine because we want to deepen that and desaturate it a little bit more so that we're able to get the effect of the shadow, I don't want to lose some of that brightness and what's reading yellow in our reference image. So we're just slowly going to build that up. I'm also going to add a little highlight because you can see there's a little highlight right by the stem for our peach. Or this isn't really the stem. Is this where the blossom was? Oh well, regardless, there's a little bit of a highlight in there, so I wanted to make sure to capture it. All right, we're going back in with our yellow and we're blending everything out. If you need to clean off your finger, that's what your paper towel is for. You will see me multiple times. I like to work with messy fingers, but I also like to work with a clean finger. So keep that paper towel handy, and when you're blending, just keep in mind what is already on your finger. And you can see as I'm working, I'm blending away from our blossom stem or whatever it is in order to give the effect that the peach is a little bit more rounded. Just like we were talking about earlier, I wanted to kind of point it out again, because even though it's not necessary for creating that depth and getting that shape, using different values and colors, it can be really helpful. And it's just one of those things, I think it's underused. We don't talk about it enough. It's such an easy way to make your piece look rounded if it's round. And as we've been doing, we're just going to continue to build up colors. As we blend things, we'll lose some details and we'll have to add those back in. So we blended out the yellow while we lost some of that deep red that's in this upper left-hand section. So we're just going to add a little bit in and just kind of blend those two together with those little flicks. We lost some of the detail in the center. We lost that shadow. So we're going to use yellow ochre and burnt umber, and we're going to blend it in with a clean finger in order to get the color and the value to read the way that we need it to. All right, I know you're probably so sick of this peach, but do know that especially when you're having repeated elements, your first one is going to take the longest because we're establishing what colors work best, kind of finding those harmonies, and really establishing the style of the piece overall. So I'm pretty happy with this. In fact, I'm so happy I'm going to add in a little bit of the highlights, which a lot of artists will say, save that till the very end. I'm not one of them, obviously. I like to kind of add it in. I want to know where my highest highlights are and my deepest shadows are. And so I do add those in pretty quickly. You do not have to, but we're ready. We're looking good. We will come back and adjust this one, but it's time to move on to our second peach. And this one will go a little bit faster. As you can see, I'm diving in right away in that shadow with our burnt umber, and that's because I already saw, okay, I actually prefer a more neutral, warm tone shadow for this piece, and so I'm not going to rely as heavily on the ultramarine blue. And so I'm going right in with that shadow tone, and I'm adding that in as I had to play with it so much in the other one, adding it in slowly, that I'm going to add it in a little bit earlier before I'm adding in the red even. So now it's time to go in with the red. Even though with the other one I started with the mandarin orange, I actually found that the red was really all that I needed. I will add in a little bit of the mandarin orange in later, but I just didn't find it as necessary to the underlayer as I had originally thought. But just like with the other one, now that we're going in with the red layer, I'm going in much more aggressively. So there's more pressure. I'm really applying it in there. I'm mixing these colors together, the ultramarine, the yellow ochre, the burnt umber. I'm trying to remember all these names, and I'm just blending these together and trying to get that initial shape right so that we're able to apply the colors over top of them. And again, if your first one was really tricky and you struggled with it, don't worry. That's pretty normal for your first one or two to be difficult while you're trying to kind of, again, learn these colors and establish your color palette, of trying to figure out hierarchy and overall value scale for this. Now I'm going in with the yellow ochre, or not the yellow ochre, the lemon yellow, and I'm establishing that yellow section that goes right across the top in kind of a horizontal section for this particular peach. And I'm also applying a light layer. You can see that I'm blending it together, but the color isn't transferring quite as much. This is the mandarin orange, because I'm not pushing quite as hard as I was on the yellow stripe that I really wanted to keep nice and pure and bright. And then just like last time, we're blending in the mandarin orange with the red by just slowly adding those layers and having those overlapping sections. Now I just blended the burnt umber up, and my pencil was still dirty. My oil pastel was still dirty. I actually used that to my advantage to try and capture this little section of the peach where there's that divot in there by adding it in when it is already kind of as a shadow. It's kind of the same as taking a shadow in one section and adding it to another. I just used it to my advantage. So I'm constantly trying to check my oil pastels to make sure that they're clean, especially the lighter colored ones if I'm working in a lighter colored area, just to make sure that I'm not transferring any crazy colors around. All right, now we've got a good base of color applied, so I'm going to start mixing things together, and I'm working the same way I did with the other one, where everything's kind of moving away very intentionally from that center section to try and get that rounded effect, but also that's how it is in the picture. And so we're going to continue adding layers, trying to lighten things, get the tones correct, and just capture that. This is the ultramarine blue, and you can see it's not transferring super well. I thought maybe I'd try it again, but it just didn't transfer as well on top of other colors. And I would push down on it and it would really just, I don't know, it was just kind of a mess. I found that the burnt umber just worked better overall. And it is kind of nice that we can just repeat it. And so I'm using it for that stem or blossom or whatever we've decided that it is. We're just able to kind of continue working on it. Taking a clean-ish finger, I am just kind of blending everything out, cleaned it again, and blending this section out, trying to capture how it moves in our reference image. And in keeping with the spirit of kind of embracing the medium that you're using, and rather than trying to force it into what you're usually doing. I am a blender at heart. I love to blend things. I like things nice and smooth, but I'm trying to have a little bit more of the raw edge. So we're just kind of like scribbling some of that color in there. I didn't do great with this piece overall, but I'm still learning and I'm still trying to grow in that area. So you'll see moments where I just kind of like scribble something in And then I go back a few minutes later and I blend it because that's just kind of how I'm wired. But I'm trying to find that little bit of balance in there. Added a little bit of the white highlight. And then a little yellow ochre here just to deepen this area without losing how it's reading more yellow. And then for this little sliver of a peach in the background, I'm going to use the concoction that I've kind of already been working with our initial one. We have the yellow ochre that has been laid down, and I laid that down pretty thick right out the gate because I do want it to read a little bit more desaturated, and this will naturally help that. And then I'm going to apply the red and the white will give it kind of that smoky haze in the background, while the red will still have it read a similar color as the peaches. And yeah, I thought that worked pretty well. I blended it out and then we were done. Oh, except this little bit of yellow right at the base. I didn't want it to read too bright, but I felt like it wasn't quite reading right without that little bit of the brighter yellow with just the yellow ochre. It was just too muted and kind of blended in with everything. And now for the section on this third peach that is harder to see because it's kind of just in between, I'm going to pretty much do the same thing, but adding the burnt umber in there. So really starting with that shadow. Oh, I added mandarin orange. Who knew? But I'm trying to really get that color in there so it's still reading the same. You don't want it to be too bright because you don't want something that's in shadow, a tiny little sliver, to jump out at you. And so I'm just applying color, trying to get it to read correctly. But the nice thing is our eye kind of fills that in for us automatically, so I didn't even really need to add the red in here to get that tone and the warmth and the fact that it would just be in shadow to be conveyed to the viewer. And then for our very last peach, we're going to follow all of the other steps. We're going to start with our yellow ochre, and we're really going to go in pretty hard with this one. Because we know that that works, and it's worked well for us in the past, but this one's in shadow, and so our yellows are going to be a little bit more dependent on the yellow ochre because it's a great way to show that lemony yellow, but in a shadow, and just overall fits with the tone that we're trying to capture. And instead of going in with the red next, I'm starting in immediately with our burnt umber, trying to really establish those shadows quickly so that we're easily able to blend when it's time to add in our red. Then once those shadows are added on, we're going to go in with the yellow. And this one, we're going to go in a little more aggressively. Again, the other ones, it was very, you can see the paper through it. It was much lighter. Here, we're just blending it in with that yellow ochre, kind of to try that as a technique for getting the tone that we need instead of going in with the yellow kind of over all the red later. And then finally we're going in with our red, and again this has the most pressure, and I'm moving in more circular motions to try and blend those colors that are around it in order to get those nice smooth gradients. I also tried the flicking blending a little bit earlier because the color texture on this peach is a little bit more stripy than the other one. So I thought maybe if I were to just blend some of this red into, up towards into the yellow, that might work a little bit better. I would say mixed results, but it was kind of fun to try, and I was able to get a little bit more tactile with everything. Once my perimeter of red was applied, I decided to go back in with that lemon yellow and just mix everything in, using it to blend, but also, not only just that initial blend, but trying to bring some of that red a little bit more into this section. I just realized it needed a little bit more of that warmth, a little bit more orangey, rather than just being the yellow ochre and the yellow. Now, some of the striping that I'm getting was because the paper on my oil pastel was getting into everything, so I had a little bit of trouble with that. I had to push the oil pastel up kind of like a glue stick, but there were other times where I also just took chunks of paper off. Once that was blended in to my satisfaction, it was time to go back in with that shadow. So this is a pretty strong shadow, because the whole thing is a little bit in shadow, but then there's the core of the shadow here as well as cast shadows. And so I'm trying to kind of blend this in nicely. I kind of wanted it to be a little bit more raw, but I kept going in and blending it. So we didn't have any of that thick, jagged raw color as much. I don't know. I'm working on it, but I'm not there yet. So just like with the previous one, I am applying the yellow ochre and I'll blend it out, adding a little bit more red, blending those together until we're getting the overall color and the value exactly where we want it to be. All right, unfortunately, my camera died and my audio was out for a while. So we're gonna move forward and I'm going to just try and fill in where needed. So I'm working on this bowl and it is a white bowl, but obviously a lot of it is in shadow. And so I'm gonna try and capture some of those actual values in here. So we've already laid down, let's see, this is pale blue, I believe. Pale blue, and then I'm going to go over it with none other than our yellow ochre. And see how that's already desaturating it. Those two are blending together even just minimally here. A little heavier here in the shadow. And then as we work our way out, getting lighter and then deeper here in this section. And then adding just a little bit here. Then I'm going to go with our burnt umber just to deepen this section. I probably don't need to do this quite yet, but I'm gonna do it anyway. And now I'm actually going to use my finger and I'm going to blend this pretty aggressively. I want to clean that off, make sure my finger is relatively clean, and I'm going to just blend these around and try and get kind of a good base set in here to just get these colors to blend together. So I can't mix a good neutral on a palette, I've got to do it on my paper. So here do we go. Okay, be careful around the peach. I don't mind if some of it bleeds a little bit onto it because there would naturally be some of that color reflected, but it's not going to be a lot because there's no light hitting it and bouncing off. So it would be pretty minimal. See how that's kind of coming together, and then we're gonna keep going. Now this will have less kind of blending, less pigment, but we still want it to come together nicely. Just a lot of back and forth here until that's nice and smooth. And to blend it out, it helps if like your finger is kind of hovering over and then you're moving while you place it down and then moving while you pick it up, and that will prevent you from like transferring any like wonky fingertips. And I just want everything to be a little dirty, even this area that's going to be a little more highlighted. I want that over there. I'm going to do the same thing here. I've got a lot of that blue in there, so we'll have to knock that back a little bit more, a little more of our burnt umber, and then yellow ochre to neutralize that a bit. All right, now we're going to go in with the white. Now my white has red on it, so I'm going to clean that off. So we're not transferring too much of it. Again, I don't mind a little bit, but I'd want it to be strategic. And I'm just going to start here and kind of rub around. Hoping very kind of a medium pressure and trying to keep it relatively even. And I'm just going to kind of fade it out. Almost the opposite of what we did initially. Next time we'll have to experiment with doing this before we blend everything together. But I kind of wanted because the vase is white, I wanted that undertone to be a little bit softer. I don't know, we're still learning. I'm still learning with you. This is just kind of what I would do if I was really limited on my palette, which I am. And I'm just moving my finger in circles. We were able to use a lot less white while still getting the undertone. And then I'm going to do the same thing here, not as much. Even the white that's still on my finger will transfer, but we want this to be Same here. All right, bowl's a little wonky. Fruit's a little easier for me still. All right, and we'll keep adding to this. We'd have a little more of a highlight here. There isn't really one there, but there's one here. And we'll kind of come back to that, add more highlights over it as we can. I'm going to go in with our burnt umber, just kind of softly, again with kind of those flicking motions of the finger just to blend it in and soften it a bit, but still keeping it obviously very there. And then more shadows here. This will be cleaned up when we're adding these base shadows, but so this is still with burnt umber. I'm going to blend this out, but then add a little bit of that reflected color in here. And now I'm really focusing on following the shape of this little bowl. So whether it's, around this way or up and down, trying to make sure that any blending that's happening is complementing that. Now just a touch of the red to transfer over. Clean off my finger a bit. Just going to keep the burnt umber a little more, blending just a little bit more. But from here on out, I'm going to let it be a little more set as it is. Now I'm just going to finish this edge and let it sit against this a little bit more. We lost a little bit of it with the blending, so just add that back in. All right, now for this green. So it's kind of I hate to use yellow ochre again, but the greens that I have are very bright. So I'm going to use Cinnabar green. And we've got one kind of in the center. It doesn't go all the way down. And then we have one off to this side that follows the shape of our bowl, and then one to this side. And we have one that follows the lips all the way around. But I'm going to take some of our yellow ochre to kind of add a sagey kind of quality, and I'm just gonna smoosh this in here and blending it all in. We will go in with our finger in a moment to get just that little bit more of that olivey tone in here. Not sagey, I don't know why I said that, but I meant olivey. All right, and I'm just going to blend this out with a clean finger. All right, now I'm going to go in with the white. We're going to add some of our highlights in. I've got kind of here. I'm going to let these be a little bit messier. I've got a nice highlight here. Okay, now I'm going to go in with our deeper green just a little bit. Clean finger to blend that out. Mostly just on this side. It's not quite as olivey as I'd like it to be. I kind of wish I had maybe started with the yellow ochre and gone in with the green, but now we know. All right, let's add some more of that burnt umber over the top. This will be a little bit more scribbly, so putting a little down, stepping back to assess. Stepping back. And just the slightest blend. Signs of highlight down here. I'm not going to fill in the whole background just because I just don't have that much. I don't have a good color for that. I could add in, I don't know, we could do the blue. I mean, that might be kind of pretty. I don't know, we'll see. Let's work on our shadows. We're going to do the same thing we did for the bowl for our cast shadow. So we're going to grab our pale blue, just kind of fill in some of this area in here. And our yellow ochre, which I'm going to clean the green off of. And then get some of this burnt umber and some of the core of the shadow. All right, and then we're just going to take a finger and blend it together. Keeping it more targeted over here. And if I had like just a better neutral color, because I just don't have a lot of neutral tones in my limited palette, I don't really want to fill in the background. I don't want anything that's going to distract from these peaches. If I decide to fill in the background, I'll update you and kind of tell you what I did, but I don't think I'm going to do that off the top of my head. So my gut reaction is no way. Because even this neutral, while I mean, I think it works, it's difficult. It's just difficult to mix that much. Oh, and I smudged. Let's see, can we use a kneaded eraser? Nope. All right, let's do some more of that burnt umber. We're going to just let it be a little more raw so we can get that deepest part of the chateau in. But I'm pretty happy overall. So now I'm going to step back, zoom back a little bit, kind of lean back in my chair, and we're going to look for those areas that we can add just a little bit of extra interest. I'm going to add a little scribble here, some of this yellow, just to kind of help this to pop a little bit more. What about our red? I think we need a touch of the red here too. Freshly cleaned fingers, so any blending that's happening isn't gonna mess with things too much. I still think this might need a little bit more. There we go. See how that just kind of tucks it in there a little bit better? And I'm going to add just a little bit of sparkle there. All right, leaning back again. Where's my yellow? I'm going to add a little bit of light back here, just softly. So just a lot of looking at my reference image. Okay, now going back here, some of the burnt umber. Just tapping that in there to give that a rounded, slightly more rounded look. I feel like this is kind of becoming a black hole. It just looks like somebody punched a hole in my paper. So I'm going to lighten that a little bit with this red. Just bring some of that back to life. Never finished this corner. Silly me. Some yellow ochre. A little bit of white. Creamy it up. And that concludes our beginner-friendly oil pastel tutorial. I hope that you've enjoyed learning alongside of me and growing in color theory and just the art of oil pastels. If you enjoyed this and would like to see more, let me know in the comment section down below. I will also include a link to all the supplies and the reference image in the description box. And until next time, happy drawing!